On a Saturday morning in April of 1984, at the Mercer County Farm Estate Auction in western Pennsylvania, a 26-year-old tow operator named Jack Brennan made what everyone agreed was the dumbest purchase of his life. He paid $425 for a 1950 Mack LT wrecker that hadn't moved under its own power in 18 years. The wrecker sat at the back of the auction lot like a monument to failure. The forest green paint had oxidized to a chalky gray-green. Both front tires were flat and rotted. The boom was frozen at a crooked angle, seized solid from nearly 2 decades without grease. The winch drum was a solid mass of rust. Someone had written, "Sold 4 PARTS" across the windshield in white shoe polish, and it had baked into the glass over multiple summers. The auctioneer tried to generate interest. 1950 Mack LT heavy-duty wrecker from the Morrison estate, original home 750 boom, been in storage since 1966, solid restoration candidate for the right buyer. Let's start at $1,000. Silence. $500. More silence. Someone in the crowd laughed. All right, $200 just to get it moving. Jack raised his hand. $200. The auctioneer looked relieved. I have $200. Do I hear $250? A voice from the back of the crowd, loud, carrying. You got a sucker at $200, Fred. Take his money before he realizes what he's buying. More laughter. The voice belonged to Vincent Calabrese. Vincent owned Calabrese Towing, the biggest recovery operation in central Pennsylvania. 14 wreckers, contracts with the state police, AAA, and 3 turnpike service plazas. He wore a bright red satin jacket with CALABRESCTOWING embroidered across the back in gold script. Drove a new Cadillac. Lived in a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Vincent walked to the front of the crowd, grinning. Fred, nobody's bidding because that Mack is worthless. Engines probably seized. Transmissions full of water. Frames likely cracked. You're looking at $5,000 in scrap metal dressed up as a restoration project. $250, Jack said quietly. Vincent turned to look at him for the first time. Jack Brennan, you running a one-truck operation out of your daddy's garage and you want to bid on this? $350, Jack said. Kid, I'm trying to save you money. $425. The auction yard went quiet. Vincent stared at Jack. Then he started laughing, really laughing. Head back, hands on his knees, couldn't catch his breath laughing. $425, Vincent announced to the whole crowd. Jack Brennan just bid $425 on a wrecker that hasn't run since Eisenhower was in the White House. He walked over to Jack, still chuckling. Kid, I'll make you a deal right now. Give me $50, I'll have one of my trucks push that piece of junk off the nearest cliff, and you can tell people you learned an expensive lesson about knowing when to quit. Jack didn't say anything. Sold, the auctioneer called. $425 to the young man in the blue jacket. Vincent shook his head, still grinning. You just bought the most useless piece of junk in Pennsylvania, kid. That Mack's gonna sit in your yard for 10 years, then you're gonna pay someone to haul it away. Mark my words. Jack paid his $425 in cash. Everything he had, collected his receipt, and arranged for a friend with a flatbed to haul the Mack to his barn. Behind him, he could hear Vincent telling the story to anyone who'd listen, the laughter following Jack all the way to his truck. Let me tell you about Jack Brennan, because you need to understand where he came from. Jack was born in 1958, the youngest of 4 kids. His father, Tom Brennan, had been a mechanic for 30 years at a Mack truck dealership in Sharon, Pennsylvania. Tom didn't own much, a small house, a 2-bay garage behind it, and more knowledge about Mack trucks than anyone else in Mercer County. Tom had taught Jack to rebuild engines before Jack could drive, taught him to weld, to read blueprints, to understand that a good mechanic could fix anything if he was patient enough. Tom died in 1982 from lung cancer. He was 58, left Jack the house, the garage, and a 1973 Ford F700 wrecker that Tom had used to run a small side towing business for local farmers. Jack was 24, trying to make a living with one aging wrecker in a county where Vincent Calabrese's operation controlled every major contract. Jack survived on small jobs, farmers' tractors, local breakdowns, the work nobody else wanted. He needed a second truck, couldn't afford a new one, couldn't even afford a decent used one. So when he heard about the Mercer County auction and saw the 1950 Mack LT in the listing, something told him to go look. His father had always said the Mack LT was the finest heavy-duty wrecker chassis ever built. They built those trucks to outlast the men who drove them, Tom used to say. Find one in decent shape, you've got a lifetime machine. The Mack at the auction wasn't in decent shape, but Jack saw something everyone else missed. The frame was solid, no rust-through, no cracks. The foundation was still there. And $425 was all he had anyway. What Jack didn't know was that the wrecker carried a secret that had been hidden in its winch housing since 1950, and that discovering it would take 11 years and a complete teardown of every system on the truck. Let me tell you about the first year, because that's when Jack should have given up. He got the Mack home in April 1984. By May, he'd confirmed what Vincent had suspected. The engine was seized solid. The inline-six Mack N4, one had sat so long without running that the cylinders had corroded, the pistons were frozen, and the oil had turned to something closer to tar than lubricant. The transmission was no better. Water had gotten in somehow, and the gears were a corroded mess. The boom's hydraulic cylinders were locked up. The winch, the heart of any wrecker, was a solid mass of rust. Jack worked on it in the evenings after tow calls, on weekends, whenever he could steal a few hours. He started with the engine. Pulling a seized engine apart is brutal work. Every bolt fights you. Every gasket has become one with the metal. Jack broke 3 bolts trying to remove the head, stripped another 4. Finally got it apart in June, looked at the damage, and sat on his garage floor wondering if Vincent had been right. But Jack had grown up watching his father rebuild hopeless engines. He knew it was possible, just expensive, just time-consuming, just a test of whether you wanted it badly enough. He ordered parts from Mack dealerships across Pennsylvania. Some things weren't available anymore, he had to fabricate them. The pistons had to be bored over size. The crank had to be ground. The cam had to be reground. It took Jack 8 months just to rebuild the engine. 8 months of night and weekend work while running his towing business during the day. 8 months of Vincent Calabrese driving past the garage, seeing the Mack still sitting there and honking his horn while laughing. By March 1985, 1 year after buying it, Jack had a rebuilt engine. It sat on a stand in his garage, fully assembled, but with nowhere to go yet because the rest of the wrecker was still a disaster. That's when most people quit, when the enormity of the project becomes clear, when you realize that fixing one system just means 10 more are waiting. Jack kept working. Let me tell you about years 2 through 6, because that's when the project went silent and people forgot about it. From 1985 to 1990, Jack worked on the Mack in complete obscurity. He rebuilt the transmission, freed the boom hydraulics, fabricated new cables for the winch, replaced every hose, every line, every seal. Nobody paid attention anymore. Vincent had moved on to other jokes. The local mechanics forgot about the Mack project. Even Jack's friends stopped asking about it. But Jack didn't stop. He just worked slower, more carefully. He was learning that restoration wasn't about speed, it was about doing it right. Every night, a little more progress. Every weekend, another system closer to functional. By 1988, the engine was back in the truck. By 1989, the transmission was installed. By 1990, the boom could move again. But the winch was still a problem. The Holmes 750 winch on the Mack was a beast, a massive drum designed to pull 15 tons, but 24 years of sitting had turned it into a solid mass of oxidation. The drum wouldn't rotate. The gears were seized. The whole assembly would need to be completely disassembled and rebuilt. Jack started on it in the fall of 1990. It took him 5 years. Let me tell you about the winch, because that's where the secret was hidden. The Holmes 750 wasn't just a winch, it was a precision mechanical system. The drum, the gears, the brake assembly, the pawl, the ratchet, all of it had to work together perfectly or the winch was useless. Jack spent 1991 and 1992 just freeing the drum. He soaked it in penetrating oil for months. Heat cycled it. Finally got it to rotate in January 1993. Then came the gear housing. That's where things got complicated. The gear housing on a Holmes 750 is a cast iron box that contains the reduction gears that multiply the pulling force. To rebuild it properly, you have to remove the entire housing from the frame, split it open, and rebuild every gear assembly. Jack started that process in the spring of 1993. He unbolted the housing from the truck frame in May. It weighed probably 400 pounds. Took him and 2 friends to lift it onto his workbench. He split the housing apart in June. The gears inside were corroded but salvageable. He spent the rest of 1993 and most of 1994 cleaning, measuring, machining, and rebuilding every component. In March 1995, he was finally ready to reassemble the housing. He'd machined new bearings, replaced worn gears, and fabricated new seals. That's when he noticed something odd. The bottom of the gear housing, the part that normally just bolts to the truck frame, had a section that looked wrong. The casting was thicker than it should be, and there were faint welding marks that didn't match the factory construction. Jack got a hammer and chisel. What he found changed everything. Someone had cut into the bottom of the gear housing, created a cavity, and welded a metal box inside. Then they'd sealed it all back up and painted over it so carefully that unless you were completely disassembling the winch, you'd never know it was there. Jack cut away the welds, pulled out a small steel box about 8 inches by 6 inches, sealed with industrial solder. His hands were shaking as he opened it. Inside was a leather pouch wrapped in oilcloth. Inside the pouch was $4,200 in cash, all bills from the 1940s, and a letter dated October 12, 1950, written in careful handwriting. To whoever finds this, my name is Michael Morrison. If you're reading this, I'm dead, and somebody finally tore this winch apart far enough to find what I hid. Let me explain something I should have reported 33 years ago, but didn't. In August 1947, there was a bank robbery in Youngstown, Ohio. 4 men with guns took $18,000 from First National Bank. 1 guard was shot. He survived but lost the use of his arm. The robbers got away clean. I was driving this Mack wrecker home from a recovery near Youngstown when I saw a car broken down on Route 62. 4 men standing around it. I stopped to help. That's what you do. While I was looking at their engine, I saw a canvas bank bag in the back seat. The name, First National Bank, was still visible, and I saw one of them had blood on his shirt. They didn't know I'd seen it. I fixed their radiator hose. They paid me $5 and they drove off. I should have called the police right then. Instead, I drove another mile, pulled over, and sat there thinking about my family, my wife, my 2 daughters, the farm we were about to lose because I couldn't make the payments. I drove back. The car was still there. It had broken down again. The men were gone. They'd run. The car was abandoned. The bank bag was still in the back seat. I took it. There was $4,200 inside. The rest of the money, $13,800, they must have taken with them when they ran. I went home, hid the money in my barn, and every day for the next 3 years I tried to figure out what to do with it. I couldn't spend it. Every dollar felt like I was stealing from that guard who'd lost the use of his arm. But I couldn't return it either, not without explaining how I got it, not without admitting I'd kept stolen money for 3 years. In 1950, I made a decision. I welded this box into my wrecker's winch housing, put the money inside with this letter, figured someday, maybe decades from now, someone would find it, and they could make the choice I couldn't make. The guard's name was Albert Russo. He lived in Youngstown. I don't know if he's still alive. If he is, or if his family is, maybe this money can go to them. If not, maybe it can help somebody else. I drove this wrecker until 1966 when my heart started giving out. I'm 68 now. The wrecker's been sitting in my barn for 4 years. My daughters want to sell it when I'm gone. They don't know about the money. Nobody does. Whoever you are, whatever you decide to do with this, I hope you understand. I wasn't a thief. I was just a man who made one terrible decision and spent 33 years trying to undo it. Michael Morrison. October 12, 1950. Jack Brennan sat in his garage, holding $4,200 in 1940s currency and a letter from a man who'd been dead for 18 years and understood something profound. The Mack hadn't been abandoned. It had been waiting. Let me tell you what Jack did, because it defines who he was. The first thing he did was research. He found newspaper archives from 1947. The Youngstown Bank robbery was real. A guard named Albert Russo had been shot and permanently disabled. Jack found Albert's obituary. He died in 1979 at age 63. But he'd left behind a daughter, Maria Russo Chen, age 49 in 1995, living in Cleveland, working as a high school teacher. Jack called her, told her the whole story, sent her copies of everything, the letter, the newspaper articles, photos of the wrecker. Maria cried on the phone, not about the money, about the fact that someone had tried to make it right, even if it took 45 years. Jack sent her the $4,200. She donated it to a scholarship fund for children of wounded security officers. But that's not what made Jack famous. What made Jack famous was what he did next. In June 1995, Jack finished restoring the Mack. 11 years after buying it for $425, $11 years of people laughing, 11 years of Vincent Calabrese making jokes. Jack repainted it in the original 1950 Morrison towing colors, forest green with gold lettering. He detailed every chrome piece. He rebuilt every system until the truck ran like it had rolled off the Mack factory floor in 1950. Then he drove it to the Pennsylvania Towing Association annual meeting in Harrisburg. Vincent Calabrese was there, giving a speech about modern recovery techniques, talking about how old equipment was obsolete and dangerous. Jack parked the Mack right in front of the conference center. When Vincent came outside and saw it, he stopped mid-sentence. The 1950 Mack LT that he'd laughed at in 1984, the most useless piece of junk in Pennsylvania. The wrecker he'd offered Jack $50 to push off a cliff. It was beautiful, and it was running. Vincent walked over, stood there staring at it, said nothing for a long time. "Jack," he finally said, "I owe you an apology." "You do?" "I said this truck was worthless. I laughed at you for buying it. I told everyone you'd wasted your money." "You did." Vincent looked at the Mack, at the restored boom, at the rebuilt winch, at the paint that gleamed in the afternoon sun. "How much did the restoration cost you?" "About $15,000 over 11 years, plus 3,000 hours of my time." "And what's it worth now?" Jack smiled. "More than you could pay." "Let me tell you about the years after, because That's where the legacy lives. From 1995 to 2010, Jack Brennan ran his towing business with that 1950 Mack as his primary heavy-duty wrecker. The truck that everyone said was worthless. The truck that Vincent Calabrese had mocked. It pulled semis. It recovered construction equipment. It did work that trucks 3 times newer couldn't handle because Jack understood it perfectly. Because he'd rebuilt every system with his own hands. In 2002, Vincent Calabrese's company started having financial trouble. The economy was changing. Smaller operators with lower overhead were taking work. By 2004, Vincent had to sell 8 of his 14 wreckers. In 2006, he closed the business entirely and retired. The last wrecker he sold was a 1998 Century that had cost him $85,000 new. It sold for $12,000. Jack bought it, used it as his second truck, but the Mack stayed as the primary. Jack Brennan retired in 2018 at age 60. The 1950 Mack LT is now owned by his son David, who runs Brennan Recovery Service in western Pennsylvania. The wrecker is 74 years old and still in service, still pulling vehicles, still working the way it did when Michael Morrison drove it in the 1950s. Michael Morrison's letter is framed in the office, next to a photo of Albert Russo, next to a newspaper article about the scholarship fund Maria created with the returned money. And every time someone new sees the Mack and asks about it, David tells them the story, the tow boss who laughed, the $425 purchase, the 11-year restoration, the hidden box in the Winch housing, the 45-year secret that changed everything. Vincent Calabrese died in 2019. He'd been retired for 13 years. At his funeral, someone mentioned the Mack story, how Vincent had laughed at Jack in 1984, how wrong he'd been. One of Vincent's sons said something Jack never forgot. "My father told me once, near the end, that the worst business mistake he ever made wasn't selling the wrong trucks or bidding on the wrong contracts. It was underestimating the guy who cared more about the work than the profit." The 1950 Mack LT still pulls vehicles in Pennsylvania, still shows up at shows and benefits, still carries Michael Morrison's story and Albert Russo's name and Jack Brennan's 11 years of refusal to quit. And every time someone sees it and says, "That old truck should be in a museum," David Brennan gives them the same answer his father gave. "Maybe someday, but right now it's got work to do." The tow boss laughed at the $425 wrecker, told the whole county it was junk, made jokes for years. The wrecker's still working. The tow boss's company is gone. Sometimes the winner isn't the one with the most trucks. It's the one who refuses to give up on the one he's got.